Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Some words, once spoken, can never be taken back. They cut so deep that they change not just how you see the person who said them, but how you see yourself. What my wife said to me during an argument about our intimacy didn't just hurt my feelings. It shattered something fundamental in our marriage that could never be repaired. My name is Desmond. My wife, Sharon, and I had been married for 2 years when our relationship began to deteriorate quickly than I thought was possible. 2 years that had started with so much promise, so much love, and what I believed was a strong physical and emotional connection. We had met at a work conference, and the attraction between us had been immediate and intense. She had come in for the conference from another state. We connected there, exchanged numbers, and the rest was history. Our courtship had been everything I could have hoped for. Although it was mostly online, we seemed to share similar values, had compatible life goals, and enjoyed each other's company. The few times she came visiting or I went to her state, I believed the physical chemistry between us was strong from the beginning, and I had every reason to believe that would continue throughout our marriage. As we kept planning the wedding, she managed to relocate to my state. The wedding itself had been beautiful, a celebration with our families and friends that felt like the beginning of something wonderful. We had spent our honeymoon in Europe, traveling through Italy and France, experiencing the kind of romantic intimacy that made me confident we would have a long and happy marriage. For the first year and a half of our marriage, things had progressed much as I had expected. We both worked demanding jobs. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other and maintained what I thought was a healthy and satisfying physical relationship. We had rented a bigger house in a quiet neighborhood, and everything seemed to be progressing normally. I was genuinely happy with the direction our marriage was heading. But somewhere around the 18-month mark, I began to notice that my wife was no longer initiating intimacy between us. This had been a regular part of our relationship since she moved in, and its absence was becoming increasingly obvious to me. At first, I attributed this change to the normal stresses of married life and career demands. She had recently been promoted at work and was dealing with increased responsibilities and longer hours. I understood that stress could affect someone's interest in intimacy, and I tried to be patient and supportive. But as weeks turned into months, the pattern became more pronounced and harder to ignore. Not only was she not initiating physical closeness, but when I would try to initiate intimacy myself, she would find ways to dodge it entirely. The rejections weren't dramatic or confrontational at first. She would claim to be tired, mention an early morning meeting the next day, or suggest that we just cuddle instead. Each excuse seemed reasonable on its own, but the cumulative effect was that our physical relationship was slowly disappearing. I found myself analyzing her moods and behavior, trying to determine the best times to approach her for intimacy. I began timing my advances around her work schedule, her stress levels, and her general demeanor, hoping to find moments when she might be more receptive. But even my most carefully timed attempts were met with polite but firm rejections. She never seemed angry about my advances, but she also never seemed genuinely interested in following through with them. It was as if physical intimacy had become an obligation she was trying to avoid rather than something she desired or enjoyed. The emotional distance that developed alongside the physical distance was equally troubling. Our conversations became more surface level, focused on practical matters like work schedules, household responsibilities, and social obligations. The deeper, more personal conversations that had strengthened our bond during our dating years became increasingly rare. I started to wonder if there was something specific that was bothering her, some issue in our relationship or in her personal life that she wasn't sharing with me. I tried creating opportunities for her to open up about whatever might be troubling her, but she consistently claimed that everything was fine. One evening, after another week of rejected advances and superficial conversations, I decided to address the issue directly. I called her over to sit with me on the couch after dinner, and I gently brought up my concerns about the changes I had been noticing in our relationship. I told her that I had noticed we weren't as physically close as we used to be, and I asked if there was anything wrong or if there was something I could do differently. I tried to know what was wrong, approaching the conversation with sensitivity and acknowledging that there might be factors I wasn't aware of that were affecting her interest in intimacy. Her response was immediate and dismissive. She claimed that nothing was wrong because she was just tired from work and not in the mood as often as she used to be. She suggested that I was overthinking the situation and that these kinds of fluctuations were normal in long-term relationships. But her explanation didn't match what I was observing. This wasn't a temporary fluctuation or a brief period of decreased interest. This was a fundamental change in the nature of our physical relationship that had been developing over several months. I decided to let her be, hoping that whatever was causing her withdrawal would resolve itself over time. I stopped initiating intimacy as frequently, giving her space and waiting for her to show signs that she was ready to reconnect physically. But letting her be never made anything better. If anything, the distance between us seemed to increase when I stopped making advances. She didn't interpret my restraint as giving her space. She seemed to interpret it as a lack of interest on my part. I felt like I was caught in an impossible situation. Either way, our physical relationship continued to deteriorate. I felt the woman I loved drifting away from me more each day. The Sharon I had married, the woman who had been affectionate and physically responsive, seemed to be disappearing. In her place was someone who tolerated my presence, but showed no enthusiasm for our shared life together. The emotional toll of this situation was significant. I began to question my own attractiveness, my abilities as a husband, and my understanding of what my wife needed from me. I wondered if there was someone else, if she had lost interest in me specifically, or if there were issues in our relationship that I was failing to address. I tried approaching the problem from different angles. I planned romantic evenings, hoping to recreate the atmosphere that had once led to physical closeness between us. I helped more around the house, thinking that reducing her stress might increase her interest in intimacy. I bought flowers, planned date nights, and made efforts to be more attentive and considerate. But none of these efforts seemed to make any difference. The romantic gestures were appreciated, but didn't lead to increased physical closeness. The additional help around the house was acknowledged, but didn't change her attitude toward intimacy. The date nights were pleasant, but ended the same way as our regular evenings, with polite distance rather than passionate connection. The pattern continued for weeks, with me becoming increasingly frustrated and confused about what was happening in our marriage. I loved my wife deeply and wanted to find a way to reconnect with her, but every attempt seemed to fail or make things worse. One Saturday morning, after weeks of this pattern, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or trying to create an elaborate romantic atmosphere, I thought I would try initiating early morning intimacy in a more natural, spontaneous way. We were both in bed, having slept in later than usual on the weekend morning. Sharon was still lying beside me, and I thought the relaxed, intimate setting might be conducive to physical closeness. I reached out and began touching her gently, hoping to gauge her interest and perhaps rekindle some of the passion that had once been so natural between us. But she wasn't responding to my touch in the way she once had. Where there had once been enthusiasm and reciprocation, there was now only passive tolerance. I tried harder, hoping that patience and persistence might help her become more engaged with what I was trying to initiate. Instead of warming up to my advances or showing any sign of interest, she removed my hand from her body with a gesture that was both firm and dismissive. The rejection was more direct than her usual excuses about being tired or stressed, and it made clear that she had no interest in physical intimacy at that moment. Feeling frustrated and confused by the ongoing pattern of rejection, I asked her directly why we weren't as close anymore. I wanted to understand what had changed between us and what I could do to restore the connection we had once shared. At first, she ignored my question, turning away from me and pretending to be focused on getting up and starting her day. But when I pressed the issue, explaining that I needed to understand what was happening in our relationship and why she seemed so uninterested in physical intimacy, that's when everything changed. She exploded with words that would haunt me for the rest of our marriage. She turned to face me with an expression of anger and frustration that I had never seen before, and she told me that the reason we weren't close anymore was that I never satisfied her. She said I never had since we got married, that I would begin what I couldn't finish, and leave her halfway through every time we were intimate because of my size down there. She added that she had assumed it would get better with time, but it never did. Her words broke my heart in a way that I had never experienced before. This wasn't just criticism of my performance or technique. This was an attack on my fundamental identity as a man and as her husband. She was telling me that I had failed her in the most intimate and personal way possible, and that this failure had been ongoing throughout our entire marriage. The cruelty of her words was compounded by the timing and the way she had kept this dissatisfaction hidden from me. She had never mentioned any problems with our physical relationship before this moment. She had never given me any indication that there were issues that needed to be addressed or areas where I could improve. Instead, she had allowed me to continue believing that everything was fine while harboring resentment and dissatisfaction that she was now expressing in the most hurtful way possible. The deception felt almost as painful as the criticism itself. I immediately withdrew from her, both physically and emotionally. The vulnerability that had led me to reach out to her that morning was replaced by a protective shell that I knew would be difficult to penetrate. I got up from the bed without saying another word and left the room. For the rest of that week, I kept to myself as much as possible while still maintaining the basic functions of our shared household. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, and went to bed. But I made no effort to engage with Sharon beyond the minimal interactions necessary for practical communication. The man who had been trying desperately to reconnect with his wife was replaced by someone who couldn't bear to be vulnerable with her again. The words she had spoken had created a barrier between us that felt insurmountable. Even when she tried to talk to me during that week, attempting to initiate the kinds of conversations I once offered her, I didn't give her the attention she was seeking. Every attempt at normal interaction reminded me of what she had said about my inadequacy as a man and as a husband. I found myself replaying her words, analyzing every aspect of our physical relationship, and wondering how long she had been dissatisfied. Had she been faking her responses during our entire marriage? Had she been comparing me to previous partners and finding me lacking? Had she been discussing our intimate life with friends or family members? Does she have another man out there? The questions were torturous, but I couldn't stop asking them. The foundation of trust and security that had allowed me to be vulnerable with her had been completely destroyed by a few sentences spoken in anger. I began building emotional walls that would protect me from further humiliation or pain. The open, trusting husband I had been was being replaced by someone much more guarded and suspicious. After 2 weeks of this cold silence between us, Sharon knew her words got to me, so she began to intensify her efforts to return our relationship to normal. She started making my favorite meals, suggesting activities we had once enjoyed together, and generally trying to recreate the atmosphere that had existed before our confrontation. She even apologized to me, acknowledging that she had used harsh words during our argument that Saturday morning. She asked me to forgive her for hurting me with such hard words and suggested that we try to move past what had happened, but it wasn't that easy. Her apologies became more frequent and more desperate as she realized that I wasn't responding to her attempts at reconciliation. While she apologized, her apology didn't change my mind about the fundamental damage that had been done to our relationship. The words she had spoken weren't just harsh, they revealed how she truly felt about me and about our marriage. An apology couldn't erase that knowledge or restore the trust that had been broken. I realized that I would never again be able to be physically intimate with her without remembering what she had said about my inadequacy. Every future attempt at intimacy would be shadowed by the knowledge that she didn't find me satisfying and never had. As we continued to live in the same house during those weeks following her apology, I found myself wondering if I should end this marriage. The relationship that had once been a source of joy and fulfillment had become a source of pain and insecurity. The woman I had thought loved and desired me had revealed that she found me fundamentally lacking as a partner. But ending the marriage would mean admitting failure, not just to myself, but to our families and friends. I wondered what everyone would think of me if they knew that my wife had found me inadequate as a husband. The shame and embarrassment of a divorce would compound the personal humiliation I was already feeling. I spent sleepless nights weighing my options and trying to determine whether our marriage could be salvaged. Can she be honest with me? Could I learn to trust her again? Could we rebuild our physical relationship after what she had revealed? Could I ever feel confident and secure in her presence again? The answer to all these questions seemed to be no. The damage was too extensive and too fundamental to be repaired. She had shown me who she really was and how she really felt, and I couldn't pretend that knowledge away. Her attempts to reconcile with me continued throughout the third week, but my mind was already moving toward a different solution. I had begun to accept that our marriage was over, regardless of her apologies or attempts to minimize what she had said. After the third week of this internal struggle, I made the decision that I knew was inevitable. I contacted a divorce attorney and began the process of legally ending our marriage. The consultation was painful but necessary, as I explained the situation and began to understand what divorce would mean practically and financially. The legal process would take several months to complete if it's fast or can linger for years if it's slow, but I knew that the emotional end of our marriage had already occurred that Saturday morning when she attacked my manhood with such vicious precision. When the initial divorce papers were prepared, I presented them to Sharon on a quiet evening when we were both home from work. I told her that she deserved to be with someone who could satisfy her, and that I deserved to be with someone who wouldn't attack my masculinity during moments of vulnerability. Her reaction was immediate shock, followed by desperate attempts to convince me to reconsider. She tried to minimize what she had said, claiming it was spoken in anger and didn't reflect her true feelings. She promised that we could work through our problems and rebuild our relationship. She even said she researched techniques we can try to get the same goal. She tried to talk with me about reconsidering the divorce, suggesting couples therapy, promising to be more patient and understanding, and swearing that she would never speak to me that way again. But my mind was already made up. The woman who had once been my partner had become someone who could wound me in ways I had never thought possible. The trust and vulnerability that are essential to a healthy marriage had been destroyed by her words, and I couldn't see any way to restore them. She continued trying to talk me out of the divorce over the following days and weeks, but I remained firm in my decision. The marriage that had begun with so much love and promise was ending because of words that revealed a fundamental lack of respect and compatibility. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the same inevitability that had characterized our marriage's decline. We divided our assets and began the process of building separate lives. The future we had planned together was replaced by uncertainty and the hope that we would both find happiness with more compatible partners. During the months that followed, as we worked through the legal and financial aspects of ending our marriage, I had time to reflect on what had happened and what it meant for my future relationships. The experience had changed me in fundamental ways that I was still trying to understand. I learned that words have power to destroy as well as to heal, and that the person you trust most in the world can also be the person most capable of hurting you. The marriage that ended because of a few sentences spoken in anger taught me the importance of kindness and respect in intimate relationships, even during moments of frustration and conflict. Sharon's words about my manhood didn't just end our marriage. They changed how I approached relationships and vulnerability. The experience taught me that some revelations about how your partner truly sees you are too damaging to overcome, no matter how much love might have existed before those revelations occurred. The process of rebuilding my self-confidence and sense of masculinity after her attack was long and difficult. I found myself questioning my abilities and worth in ways that extended far beyond our physical relationship. The seeds of doubt she had planted grew into larger insecurities that affected how I interacted with women and how I saw myself as a man. I began working with a therapist to process what had happened and to understand how to move forward from such a devastating blow to my self-esteem. The sessions helped me realize that Sharon's words said more about her character and her way of handling conflict than they did about my worth as a person or as a partner. Through therapy, I learned that attacking someone's fundamental identity during an argument is a form of emotional abuse that can cause lasting psychological damage. What Sharon had done wasn't just cruel, it was destructive in ways that went far beyond the immediate hurt of the moment. I also learned that healthy relationships require partners who can express dissatisfaction or concerns without resorting to personal attacks or attempts to destroy each other's self-worth. The way Sharon had chosen to express her frustrations revealed a lack of emotional maturity and respect that made our marriage unsustainable. Looking back now, I can see that our problems might have been addressed differently if we had been able to communicate more effectively about our physical relationship. If she had expressed her concerns earlier and more constructively, we might have been able to work together to improve our intimacy. The months following our separation were difficult as I worked to rebuild my sense of self and my confidence in intimate relationships. The damage Sharon had done to my self-image required conscious effort and professional help to overcome. I found myself hesitant to entertain the thought of any new relationship, worried that future partners might harbor similar secret dissatisfactions or might use intimate knowledge about me as a weapon during conflicts. The trust that had once come naturally to me in romantic relationships had been severely damaged. But with time and continued therapy, I began to understand that Sharon's behavior was not representative of how healthy partners treat each other. I learned to recognize the difference between constructive feedback about relationship issues and destructive attacks on personal identity. I also learned the importance of establishing clear boundaries about how conflicts would be handled in future relationships. The experience with Sharon taught me that some forms of communication are unacceptable regardless of the emotions or frustrations that might be driving them. The experience taught me the importance of addressing relationship issues early and directly, rather than allowing problems to fester until they exploded in destructive ways. I learned to value open, honest communication that focused on solving problems rather than inflicting emotional damage. I learned to pay attention to how potential partners treated service workers, how they spoke about ex-partners, and how they handled disagreements in the early stages of relationships. These behaviors often provide insight into how someone will treat you when the initial excitement of a new relationship wears off. The divorce was finalized approximately 8 months after I had first filed the papers, which my attorney explained was relatively standard for a case without children or complex financial arrangements. During those months, Sharon and I had minimal contact, communicating only through our lawyers about practical matters. When the final decree was signed, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the legal entanglement was over and that I could truly begin to rebuild my life, but sadness for the dreams and plans that had died along with our marriage. In the years that will follow, I still hope to enter new relationships, but I will approach them with the wisdom and caution that have been earned through painful experience. I will be more careful about the partners I choose and more vigilant about the patterns of communication that develop between us. Sometimes the most honest moments in a relationship are also the most destructive ones. The truth that Sharon revealed about her feelings toward me was probably something she had been harboring for months, but the way she chose to reveal it made reconciliation impossible. The man who had been trying desperately to save his marriage became someone who understood that some marriages can't and shouldn't be saved. The words that were meant to express frustration became the words that ended everything we had built together, leaving both of us to start over with the lessons learned from our failed attempt at lasting love. Today, I can honestly say that while Sharon's words wounded me deeply, they also freed me from a relationship that was fundamentally unhealthy and unsustainable. The pain of her attack was intense but temporary. Staying in a marriage with someone capable of such cruelty would have been a lifetime of diminished self-worth and emotional damage. I never looked at her the same way after those words were spoken, and I realized that I never could. Some things, once said, change everything irreversibly. The marriage ended not because of our physical problems, which might have been solvable, but because of her character, which was not.